thanks everybody for taking a bit of time out of your day today to walk through this information that we've got to share with you. And I think if we look at what's been going on in the industry, everybody is still continuing to try and figure out how to make the most impactful decisions regarding what they're doing with regards to their cloud strategy. And you might look at this and go, well, gosh, it seems like an obvious statement to say that cloud maturity is going to drive operational efficiency. But I think if we look at the sort of thread through there, there's definitely this reality, which is if you can start to build a level of maturity and muscle that becomes transferable into different platforms, you're going to gain a massive scale of efficiency across your organization. So just as we start to move forward, I think we really see from our respondents that there's this, big push around, utilization of cloud, how that's been driving business outcomes, and sort of those big three that we almost always talk about in the industry, with regards to speed to market, reduction of risk, and then, driving efficiency as part of that. So this is the third year that we've been running the State of Cloud Strategy survey with Forrester. And, if we sort of, walk our way through it, I think it's been really interesting to see how every year we sort of use what's gone on in the previous year to kind of try and dig a little bit deeper or to inform some of the content of the survey that comes through. So that first year was very much, how do you go about actually wrangling, a multi-technology strategy? I know we often talk about multi-cloud. It's probably easier and shorter to say that. But I think, even if you're, still operating within the walls of your data center and not even using public cloud at all, you are still trying to tackle, how do I, work with a multitude of vendors? And how do I get the best out of my team in terms of operating and managing that? And what came to light out of that first survey in 2021 is absolutely that rise of success being driven or predicated by having a common level of an operating model across each of your technology stacks, multi-cloud, multi-technology. The second was really starting to tackle the question, as we saw people really leaning into that idea of multi-cloud, is there actually value to be gained out of doing this, or is this all just a bit of a rabbit warren? We start to dive into this and we think we're going to get benefit, but are we actually? And thankfully, I'm glad to say, especially for us, that the result was a resounding yes. Absolutely, there's massive value to be gained out of bringing new technologies into your organization, into your business, and getting the most out of those to really drive particular outcomes. And so then this year's theme was all about that organizational maturity, right? How do you start to really drive the benefits and not just, probably a good example of this that I've heard some people talk about is the difference between actually having multi-cloud and multiple clouds, and that concept of silos versus the idea of actually really trying to embrace that multi-technology stack. So we'll dig into that a little bit more. And if we look at sort of those big numbers, again, we've only got half an hour here today, and we're already sort of coming up on 10 minutes into that. So we're not going to get into all of the detail, but there's a bunch of high points there that are really worth pulling out. Everybody is feeling the pinch of what's going on in the macroeconomic climate at the moment. But what's really interesting to pull out of it, the survey this time around is, not everybody is saying, yeah, we need to rein back that spending. So over 50% of customers that we spoke with, I say customers, of the survey respondents that we engaged with are continuing to increase their spend. So despite that downward pressure on price, people are still investing heavily and trying to grow what they're doing within the cloud. Almost all of the organizations that we spoke with say that multi-cloud is really working to hit what they're looking for from a business need perspective, or it's on that trajectory, right, to actually get towards that point, which is really important and a really good number. 53% of the respondents are saying, yeah, actually, a lot of leverage that we're gaining out of using multi-cloud is enabling us to save a level of money. Off the back of that, we'll delve into some of the reasoning why. And 74, I think this one to me is probably one of those big ones that ties into some other findings throughout. But the idea that as you bring some additional interesting technologies into your business, and as you start to bring multi-cloud as like, I guess, the example of that into your business, it's working to help attract people who want to come and work on, those shiny things, those new things, and gain that experience, or, potentially even bring their experience into your organizations. Two number ones there, which are fantastic. But tying into the previous point, everybody is saying skills, 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 skills. And, at HashiCorp, we talk very much across the breadth of the stack, from, automation and, some of the infrastructure as code capabilities, security, connectivity, the runtime. It doesn't matter which of those sort of 4 key aspects of, cloud and building out a platform you talk about. Everybody's saying that skills gaps are, or people are, very, very hard to attract. So finding good ways to attract them is super, super important. Security, of course, no surprise there. I think, especially for everybody who's coming in out of the ANZ market, breaches are becoming very, very high profile, something that everybody is really starting to think about heavily. And the benefits that you can gain by adopting cloud and leveraging some of the native security capabilities, embedding security into your platform layer as the interface to those clouds, is really starting to drive a lot of uptake. And then finally, just tying into that last point again, not everybody, 92% of organizations say that they are really leaning into that idea of, how do we build a centralized capability that allows us to implement, the appropriate standards and interfaces, so that we can accelerate people's cloud adoption? I say people, teams within your organization, different business units, and give them effectively a springboard as they're trying to adopt cloud and use it to drive the things that they're actually building. So to jump into our first sort of key point with a little more detail here, while cloud spending is driving up, what was really information is the additional data points that we see from customers with regards to their cloud spend, and what they're saying in terms of where they think they should be able to get some, cost reductions coming off the back of that. So probably no surprise if you've looked at any of our previous versions of this. We've really been trying to drill into how do customers better optimize their cloud usage, right, in order to drive costs down. And the thing that I'm quite excited about when I look at this data here is how we use this actually to inform our own product development strategies, right? And what we do when it comes to the real world problems that customers are wrestling with regards to, whether it's that, idle and underused resources, the over provisioning elements, operational efficiency that people are looking to gain, and start to build those in as product capabilities. So we're about 6 weeks out now from HashiConf, which is our, major conference for the year. So I want to say October 10 till 12. That's US times. So what's that? 11 till 13 here in the APJ market. You'll hear a little bit of interesting stuff around what we're doing and what's coming down the pipe and what we're releasing with our products to try and help tackle some of these problems. Thanks, Eric, for the link there. Absolutely. You can register. For those who aren't able to get over to LA, there is absolutely going to be a live stream as well. So you'll be able to catch all the keynotes, any of the information. And I think within a couple of days as well, Eric, they sort of tend to have those things on playback as well. So even if you don't want to be up very late or very early to catch those, you'll be able to get all that information. Lack of needed skills. So I think this is a really interesting one in terms of how do you optimize your efficiency. So this ties into that sort of main thread that you'll see throughout this. Having people who, have the ability to have deep technical working knowledge of technology platforms throughout the entirety of your business is something that we've just seen everybody wrestle with and try and figure out how to deliver, but without being able to do so. And so the question becomes, how do you take those people who have the skills and turn them into a point of leverage, in effect, so that they're more of a scaling function in the context of building out those platform teams, so that you can get their skills, get their exposure, get their experience, and effectively codify those, turn those almost into, experience as an API to allow other people to be able to consume those and take advantage of those throughout cloud and other technology stacks. Multi-cloud and how that's delivering results across the board. So I think this is really interesting. Looking at the question there, to what extent has your organization gained the following benefits from its strategy? The strongest security posture, and we'll get into this. I'm probably going to shoot myself in the foot here by talking ahead of the presentation. I think what's really interesting there is that people have traditionally sort of thought, hey, if I go all in with a particular set of technology, then the more I understand it, the better that I'm in a position to do things like, hey, secure it, to apply best practices to it. What we found interesting, and as you sort of scratch on this a little more, is when people start to bring more and additional technologies into their stack, it forces them to move into, jumping on another buzzword here, but the idea of systems thinking, right? How do we holistically consider what's going on from a security point of view, so that rather than, only focusing on the micro, and believe me, there's importance in focusing on the micro, we think of that in the greater context. And so we're not looking at, say, AWS specific controls or AWS specific concerns. Rather, we're saying, hey, what are the concerns when we start to think about public cloud within our environments? How do we start to translate some of those things that we've always looked at as, unassailable knowns, like we encrypt our storage arrays, versus starting to look at this and say, oh, actually, the data is the thing that we need to encrypt, not the infrastructure itself. And you start to be able to bring, by breaking open some of that traditional thinking, it starts to really drive a stronger security posture in there as well. Jumping to the third one, increased or improved automation tooling. I think there's no doubt when we start to look at it that modern technologies are absolutely coming through and saying API first, right? And what that enables then is downstream automation and capabilities, whether we tie that into the previous point around security postures and look at things like, automated certificate rotations, how we get into key management and rotation of those, or whether it's just purely talking about, application automation through, more and better release automation processes. These technologies are allowing people to take better advantage of these things. Now, I'm just aware that I'm leaning into some of this stuff and adding some commentary here. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because otherwise we're going to run out of time. But I think the key here is that, by leaning into the multi-cloud story, you're really able to get, that visibility, driving that efficiency and automation, and ultimately is leading to stronger stability and uptime overall. Okay, on to the one, as I said, that is probably more challenging and what everybody is wrestling with. It doesn't matter who I talk to. It doesn't matter which country I'm in across the region. It doesn't matter which vertical I go into. Skills and staffing is up there as the thing that everybody is trying to figure out how to solve and how they actually go about doing it. Thanks, John. It really is up there. It doesn't matter, as I said, whether we're talking about security, whether we're talking about automation, whether we're talking about cloud, whether we're talking about data center. Those challenges are massive and massive. And the thing that I'd like to share, which is not on the slides here, but which comes up an awful lot in conversations when we start talking about how do you go about hiring and how do you go about finding the right people. And I'm not sure whether we've got any hiring managers on the call today, but whether I'm talking to you, whether I'm talking to practitioners who are actually looking to push up and look for their new jobs, the advice would remain the same. I think there's two things that we sort of talk about in candidates, and the first is their skill and the second is their will, right? So just nice rhyming way to remember it, skill and will. Some people have skills, but they're not really motivated. They don't want to learn new things. They've just picked things up by experience over time. You know what? You can bring those people into your organization and they're going to help you up to a certain point. But the minute that your direction changes, the minute you try and push them into something new or give them the opportunity to stand up for something new, they're not necessarily going to be the people who respond and really step up to that opportunity. Finding people who have curiosity, finding people who want to learn new things, I think having that aptitude and that will and that desire is becoming so important, because it really is, you can have that opportunity to learn new things at any point in time. There's lots of training out there, but by coming in with the willingness to say, hey, yes, I want to make things better, and yes, I want to look at new ways of doing things, they're the people who are actually really starting to see success in these organizations. And we're actually seeing some of the larger organizations across the region even starting to sponsor and offer internships for people who are coming out of different industries, who are demonstrating the right kind of attitude and I guess again, sorry, I'm gonna use another one here, but growth mindset, right, in terms of how they're looking to grow and develop themselves, and what they're looking to offer. So number one, I would say from a hiring point of view, that becomes a very, very important thing to look for. And as a candidate, try and develop that, right? Try and develop your curiosity and find interesting things. Now, from a survey point of view, definitely that idea of implementing the common operating model here is really important, right? There's another great YouTube somewhere where Mitchell and Armand talk about the four sort of styles when we talk about multi-cloud, or the four different things that we think about. And often we kind of equate those things just based on our own experience, and we say, well, multi-cloud is about either portability of workflows, which is what HashiCorp talks about, right? It's not about necessarily all of the details. It's how do you build an operating model that's going to work, and that you can plug in different technologies to get scale. There's portability from a networking perspective. There's portability from a workload perspective. And I've caught myself out here ad-libbing because the fourth one off the top of my head, I can't quite remember what it is, but definitely worth the read and definitely worth getting into. And for the question that's just come in on the Q&A, I think that is worth definitely getting into, right? So I think, the question, I'm not sure if everybody can see it. It's like, when we speak of organizations with a multi-cloud strategy, are they really multi-cloud, or are they organizations with multiple clouds? Look, my experience in this space would tell me that typically multi-cloud is an organizational strategy, right? It's very rare that you start to see a single application and a single stack saying, hey, I'm going to pull services from multiple different places, unless we're talking about bringing things like edge in, where you're collecting telemetry, but you don't have the ability to sort of process that locally to where that is, and you're going to ship that off somewhere else. So organizations, 100%, we're seeing lean into multi-cloud, but it typically does require some kind of centralized team. Some organizations will call that a cloud center of excellence. Some of them are called platform teams. But regardless, it's that idea of saying, hey, we've developed some kind of muscle here that increases our velocity in terms of how business units can actually build the things that they're trying to build, whether they're net new services, whether they're specifically APIs or products. How do we effectively accelerate that? And it does require that layer of consistency in terms of workflow. All right, sorry, just got myself a little off track there, responding to that and riffing a little bit. But I think, again, one of the more interesting ones there down the bottom, to my mind, is this idea of removing environmental or operational silos. This is one where I feel a little bit opinionated about. I think if Eric was actually still on camera, he'd probably be laughing, because I have opinions about lots of things all the time. But I think there's different ways that you can tackle this idea of environmental or operational silos. And the way that most people look at this has been, I think the greatest recent history example of this is the conversation about DevOps. It's like, some people like, we'll build a DevOps team and we'll just put people in there, and that creates, this environment where we don't have silos. But then they realize, actually, all we've done is go ahead and, we've just created yet another silo, by doing this. But when you look at it, the way that we start to think about this is, well, it's not necessarily that the silos are bad things. If we look at why farmers have silos, if one silo of grain gets ruined, the other one doesn't. So it starts to be, some of these conversation about either, deconcentration of risk, or being able to build up appropriate skills in different teams, the thing that you want to break down is actually the friction in terms of the interaction between those teams. So again, when we start to talk about this idea of bringing in a platform team, it's all about how do teams publish their expertise in a way that's consumable then by other teams, so that everything becomes faster, it results in less friction, and you actually have really good dynamics between interactions of teams. So, Grant's personal take on this is you're not necessarily removing the silos, but what you're doing is removing the friction between the engagement of said silos as part of that. And we've got another question that's come in here, which is, has HashiCorp considered having different cloud providers in a single project? If you wouldn't mind just maybe expanding on that question a little bit, because there's a few different ways potentially that I could respond to that. I'll move on to the next slide just while you maybe expand on that, and I'll come back and answer that one. All right, moving ahead. I've been talking about this one sort of nonstop throughout the conversation today, and since we're coming up on time, I won't spend a lot of time on it, but the trajectory is there, right? It doesn't matter whether we are talking about teams who have sort of classified themselves as having lesser operational maturity versus people who are very high maturity. Everybody wants to have this. Everybody is actually on the trajectory to introducing these teams. And it really is becoming a very critical point of capability, whether it's for talent attraction, talent retention, speed of project, implementing centralized controls around security, architectural best practices, et cetera, et cetera. This is probably the key thing that we are seeing without a doubt worldwide and within APJ. And I sort of alluded to this one before, right, with regards to security initiatives and what that actually means in terms of driving some of this in terms of cloud. So just diving into those, and I sort of landed on an example before earlier, right, where it's like, hey, it's not about encrypting storage arrays anymore. It's not about even encrypting the databases. It's actually about encrypting the data. So I think things like data protection, things like tokenization, and the different capabilities that you have to hand, again, they become more and more and more important, especially when we talk about the context of the public cloud, whereby the perimeter is very much logical in nature, and there's a lot more concern about what data you're collecting and what data you're potentially putting at risk, right, if you make any kind of mistake. Secrets management is a big one. Just sort of also moving outside of HashiCorp's own survey here. If we look at the Verizon report that delves into like where the different attacks have come from, it was over 50%. I want to say it was 54 off the top of my head. 54% of attacks all involved a set of company credentials. So credentials, secrets is very much an overarching kind of thing that we talk about there, where if you don't have control of those, that leads to a massive attack vector. And since the cloud APIs are all public, right, especially things like cloud credentials start to become much more sensitive and much more of a concern for things that you actually need to deal with. All right, and no surprise on this one. Mature organizations value automation tools. I feel like this is, sort of our Captain Obvious to finish things off and just capstone. Let's lead with something that's let's finish up with something that's not particularly controversial. Automation is all about taking something that works and then doing it multiple times, right? And as I said at the beginning, whether we're talking about the way that you deploy autoscale groups in AWS, the way that you implement security controls regarding, operator access to sensitive systems, it's all about how do we take something and allow us to both scale those best practices architecturally, or even how do we go about remediating? In the last couple of minutes, just a simple story of this. I was talking with a customer recently who shared with me that one of the massive benefits that they had gotten out of moving towards an immutable infrastructure model and building out images with Packer and then deploying those with Terraform was that when they had a security incident, they could just go net new build, and then across the entirety of their fleet, they could actually roll through a whole new base image within 7 hours. Was across their entire environment, and not being able to tell you who that was, but that was in the vicinity of sort of 5,000 nodes that are across their environment, where it's just easy and able to say, okay, once we know that we've got something that we need to respond to, we can effectively just leverage our automation to roll out and patch the base image rather than needing to identify which systems are critical or not, and then roll that through. So automation just gives you a huge amount of power, as it says there, whether it's response to IT issues, event security issues, being able to get flexible about the way that you're actually using infrastructure or more. Automation is a really, really critical part of that. So with that, I'm going to stop here. And if you want to delve into more of the data yourself, the link is on screen there. I think Eric has either shared it or he's going to share it so that you can link into it. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.